This webinar, by the way, is mostly going to be an overview of what's in the release and how to get the release. Do one small demo just to keep things a little fun, but it's mostly an update of everything that's new. And then we get into some demos planned for Wednesday and Friday. So in this quarterly release right now, we just released the second release candidate. That's available through the download site and also announcements made on the forum. That's available for you to test. We anticipate that that will go to a final build probably early next week. So we're looking at that to be finalized probably as the last few cases trickle in and we fix them. There are several dozen fixes and small enhancements in the core product. I went through all of the extension releases with the team, and I think at least 17 packages are updated with enhancements and fixes. So we'll go through those quickly as well. So there's a lot to cover. We also have a new plugin that's for doing sort of token-based security, and we'll do a whole webinar devoted to that on Wednesday. And then also a major release of the Google Maps plugin or component for Servo. Should be some nice things to demo for that that we plan for Friday. In the core updates, so the IDE and the application server, first of all, that's available now with native installers for both Mac and Windows. So we now ship signed installers that hopefully our antivirus programs won't complain about because they're signed, EXE for Windows and DMG for Mac. You can also get the zip installer for Linux, or if you just like to do the zip installer, that will work for any platform. You just unzip it and you can run it. A lot of the focus on this release has been performance improvements in the developer environment itself. So we made things multi-threaded and asynchronous on load. We delay the activation of the solution so that the IDE actually can start up much faster. So there was quite a lot of work done there. One thing that you'll notice when you first open up this version of Servo is something new, that it's going to ask for a login, and this is the same login for your credentials when you download, when you use the forum, when you use the support.servo.com. So that's the single sign-on on our Servo cloud. And the reason for this is to begin to bring you a cloud-connected IDE. As we announced at Servo World, we anticipate more and more of the innovation on the Servo products to be coming in the Servo cloud. Today, that includes the pipeline as a service, so automated build, automated end-to-end testing, also production hosting now available. And then coming, we anticipate more analytics and the mobile and desktop, the native mobile and desktop builders coming as a cloud service that can be connected to your account. So this is an important step. It's not meant to annoy you. If you log in once, it will be remembered in your Eclipse credential store and re-logged in for all of your developer environments. So it's not like you have to log in for each one or every time you switch workspace. So it's really meant to be non-intrusive. It's also possible to log out and log in if you have multiple developers for some reason on the same workstation. You'll also notice that the first use splash screen comes up with some tutorials. We're going to be developing that over the next weeks and months to bring some what we call tiny tutorials. This is more aimed at new users, although we believe that the content can be helpful for existing users as it gets developed. And these are meant to be able to link directly in the IDE. So another reason we want to be connected with our cloud from the IDE. So the first tutorial that will ship by the final release will be the example solution, which shows how to quickly build something using a lot of the pre-packaged modules and extensions. So in just a few minutes, you can get a really robust looking application. So we'll be bringing that to you as this release goes final. But for now, there's just the About Servo tutorial video in there for now. But we'll be able to bring you small tutorials as things are developed. So it's another way that we can reach out and help you guys better make solutions and better figure out Servoy. So this is meant really to help you learn as you go. Just some minor things about this release. We provide an upgrade of Eclipse. We provide an upgrade of Tomcat. So this is the one that's embedded when you run developer, but also the application server version itself. For those of you that use the embedded PostgreSQL database, that's also updated now for Mac OS. Some of the main enhancements that are not related to performance, but more related to API and things. There is now, it's minor, but named found sets. There's an API call to get the name of the found sets. That only makes sense. That's for using sort of separate instances of found sets that you can do at design time by name or via API. And so now we support being able to figure out what the name of a found set might be if you use named found sets. So that's kind of just a logical addition to the API. We added support for the SQL any clause, which is kind of a substitution for in, and we do that dynamically based on dialect for supporting database vendors, which I think is only Postgres at this time, but that could change in the future. So we'll pick up the dialect and switch it. The reason for this is also support and performance for not having temp tables. Sometimes there's a limit to what you can put in a SQL in. So this improves performance because we can do an ANY, which we don't have to create a large temp table if it gets really big. We also in the IDE we relaxed the allow null and table editor. We had some requests for this, I think, for some time. The reason we avoid doing it is we really can't control that afterwards, but because it's when the table is created, it's fine. But if you are managing your database in the back end differently, then changing the allow null here will be supported, but you have to take care yourself then to manage whether or not a column really allows null in the back end. We can only control it when you create a table through Servoy or allow Servoy to create a table through import. But we have many people who do maintenance on databases in import hooks and in other ways and scripts. So this is just sort of a bit more flexibility, but use it with care if you do use it because you want to be in sync with what's actually in your database. Something that I can demo today are the next couple of points. I can do a tiny demo around this. We used to have this function in older versions of Servoy to get the startup arguments. So these could be arguments that are passed in via deep link in the URL. And we had removed those and sort of pushed them to the on-solution-open event. The reason we brought it back is a bit tricky to explain, but if you've been using Servoy for a while, you might get it. When you put a login form on a solution, the on-solution-open event doesn't get called until after you log in. But if you want to have some sort of deep link arguments, like maybe a tenant or a user token or something, and you want to pick that up before login, before authentication, there was no way to do it because you don't get it till later. So we actually added that back so you can call it, say, when the login form loads or something. There's always been a way to do this if you use a full login solution, which is a separate module that then switches control to the main application, and that does get the on-solution open event called. But this allows you to do a more lightweight implementation. So that's kind of a nice addition. For NG clients, you can really start to not use the login solution, but instead can use the login module or the login form. On sort of the flip side of that, when you're logging out now through the API, you can actually pass in the deep link arguments, just the arguments, and you don't have to worry about having a method that you want to say call and pass the arguments to. So those will get picked up again. And finally, the database manager API save data, which has been in Servoy since the beginning. It now takes an array of records. We have always been able to just do a blanket save, so everything that's pending, saving individual records and also saving entire found sets. So now you can also just pass in an array of records of your choice. So it provides a bit more nuance into how you save data. What I can do is kind of quickly show a small demo of how to do the deep link stuff, because I think a lot of people use deep links and I just want to make sure that you understand this. And then I'll go back into sort of a overview of all the packages and plugins and things that are updated. Okay. So I'm going to go over to Servo IDE. I have an application here called Test Deep Link, and you can see that I've set up the login form. This is my login form. It's very simple. It takes a username, you push the login button. There's not actually any real security here, it just logs you in. What I want to do is be able to deep link in and sort of suggest a username. So I'm going to go ahead and launch this. And I'll log in first as Sean, and I'll push the login. So you can see that it says welcome Sean. And then it gives me the option to log out but re-log in as someone else. So I'll put in my colleague Rutger, and I'll log out. And now you can see in the URL here, it's giving the username equals in the query string. You could also construct this from a deep link from an email or something, and that's getting picked up here, and you can see that it's set as the default. So if we look at this in the login form, I'm calling it in the onload event right here. If we jump into that in the script editor, you can see that I'm just calling that method that was brought back, that get startup arguments, and then the second argument would be the query string, and then that'll be sort of like a JSON object with, and I printed it out here. The argument is username Rutger. So that's how I'm able to pick that up off a deep link, and I could do that right in the on load event of the login form, because the on solution open event isn't called, although I implemented it. You can see that there's a binding here for on solution open, where I actually pick up the username and put it to a variable so I can display it. It's not, you can see that here it's undefined because it doesn't get called until after the login. So that's just kind of a new way to deal with that if you're using deep links, and I think a lot of people do because they're really useful for all kinds of things. This is I think a kind of a small change, but a very helpful change, because you can handle that in a login form. Also, you can see finally on the logout, the first form that it gets when it logs in, I have this logout event, and if we look at the script editor for that, I'm passing in now the argument here, username, and then whatever I put in that variable that I captured from user input. So that was added sort of as a complement to also being able to deep link directly and pick up the startup arguments, so you can log out and pass that in. So that's it, just a small demo for now. We have really nice demos planned for Wednesday and Friday, but I'm gonna go back to the overview because we have a lot to cover. Alrighty. So as far as plugin updates, we're shipping a brand new plugin, and we're going to cover this on Wednesday. But just to give you a quick preview of that, it's the JWT plugin. And this allows you to generate and verify JSON web tokens, which is kind of an industry best practice for exchanging claims securely between two parties. So this is great for encoding payloads with some information in them for doing token-based authentication, etc. So you can both generate and verify the tokens from a client-server plugin, and we'll have a nice demo of how that works and why you might want to use it. It could be for token-based authentication to web services, or even like a deep link into a solution. So if you want to store a token in the local web storage, then have it be valid for a certain amount of time, but still secure and only decipherable on your server. So it's a great tool for that. So we'll show all about that on Wednesday, but that's now available in Servo Core when you download and install. it's there in the default plugins that we ship. Also, the Jasper Reports plugin was updated. Mainly, we updated this for library dependencies that were also updated. So the Commons collection library from Apache and some of the parsing libraries were updated. We also support some export and print formats. I don't know, I accidentally put POI in there. I meant to put POI up here in the library dependencies. That's not a format, it's a typo. But excuse me, XLS, SEX, JSON metadata, and CSV metadata are now supported for export and print formats. I have a slide and a little bit about the svyutils package that was updated. You just want to make sure the version of POI is in sync. So we recommend that you get the POI HR file from the Jasper Reports plugin. That's all really well documented. But this does have a small impact for those of you using the svyutils package for Servo as a module. Also, we haven't done it yet, but we will be moving Jasper Reports to GitHub. It's currently still maintained on ServoForge, but we'll move it on GitHub because of the available documentation, wiki documentation, etc. there. And we can also move it to Git. So that will be coming shortly. Into some of the packages updates. As I said, we had, I think, 17 packages updated. I'll go through the ones that had sort of more major or minor enhancements, and then quickly through the ones that had just a maintenance bump. So we will be doing a webinar on the Google Maps component for Servo. There were, I think, 10 enhancements and 5 fixes on that one, including enhanced marker support. So different things you can do with markers, some more things around the API, such as zoom level and centering a map on location, etc. So if you've used this component before, it was really very vanilla. You just set up your data binding to what's going to generate a marker or a group of markers, and that was it, and it would show them on a map. Now there's more support there. We also added support for KML files, which is a kind of markup for putting geographic features on a map, on a Google map, and getting the route information as well. That's available today via the Servo Package Manager, and we'll do a webinar on that on Friday. There was a minor version bump to the SPI Security Project. This is, for those of you who don't know, this is the main security extension for doing multi-tenancy and permissions control for any applications in Servo. We added 4 new API enhancements, also two enhancements to the, there's a SPI Security UX module, which we did a webinar about, I think, in the last quarter release, which provides sort of a default user experience for managing security, and there were 2 small enhancements there. There is one potentially breaking change. Permissions that sync out of the developer environment to the runtime was sort of turned on only while in developer, and then requiring an import hook to do the sync when you go to deployment. This is ideal, except for when you're kind of getting started. It's frustrating because the stuff you do, you might be adding lots of permissions in developer, and then you're deploying and testing, and then it doesn't sync automatically, and you have to do with the import hook. What we did is we added a config property so that you can decide when you want to sync permissions, and we default it to true, that when you deploy, it'll auto sync permissions, which you can then later you can override to false and do it with an import hook when you're going more towards production. But for development, you can just leave it that it's always going to auto sync. The downside would be that there could be some performance overhead because it's based on when the scope loads. So every client that's logging in is going to do a sync of permissions. Some of our customers have large ERP applications which could have many permissions in them, and that's going to be doing a sync per client as they're logging in, which adds to some overhead, which is why we sort of disabled it and made it via an import hook. But then we realized that makes it difficult for people who are kind of just developing and testing and changing things, that they have to go and do that in an import hook. So we switched it around so you can have kind of the best of both worlds, and you can configure it with this property. So I know that's a very detailed explanation, but we really like to now address anything that's potentially breaking change in a release of any of our packages or the core product. So want to let you know about that one. That module is available now with the Servo package manager. We did a minor version bump to the Bootstrap components. The Bootstrap components are kind of the default regular business components for any HTML5 applications. And we added 3 enhancements and 2 fixes. One of them is having to do with, so a lot of these components you can inject markup into them. So you might have a label and you want to put some markup in that label to make it a bit more rich or a bit more dynamic. The challenge with that is you have to then programmatically say whether or not the markup in that should be trusted or not. This is having to do with security and cross injection attacks. And what we want to do is not have to do that via code, but we made it a component property so that you can go on the component and just say whether the text is trusted or sanitized. So you can have markup, which we by default we sanitize the markup, but you can mark it as trusted and then put what you want in there. And that's now at a component level. We added a method to programmatically select a tab on the tab panel. Also, this one's my favorite. The default size when you place a Bootstrap component, it was like a big blocky rectangle. So we made that, I think, now 200 by 30. So if you're placing, text box, checkbox, those types of buttons, those types of things, they actually are sized a bit nicer. So also of note, there were 2 components in there. I'm not sure if anyone was really using them because we had nicer versions of them in the Bootstrap Extra library and in the NG grids and the Servo Extra table component. So the progress bar and the Bootstrap table, we are deprecating those because they are very basic implementations, and we have had for a while now better implementations of those components. However, some of you might be using them, so they're only deprecated. They won't go away yet, but you won't see them in the palette of components. The corollaries of those are in the Bootstrap Extra package. We have the progress bar there, and then for grids we have a number of options. We have the NG grids, which has the data grid, the power grid, and then we have also in the Servo Extra library we have the table component there, which is like the really fast, lightweight, performing grid. This one is we're just cleaning up the last fix having to do with the markup stuff. So this one's not in the Servo package manager just yet. It'll be in there by the end of the week when the release goes final, the core release goes final. The Servo Extra components, which is sort of an extension of the normal business components. There was a minor bump to that one. We improved some of the wiki docs there, and we added the JS event parameter to one of the components, click events. So right click, double click, single click. They all now pass a JS event, which you can pull off the X, Y coordinate, the time, etc. Really minor update there. That's in the Servo package manager as well. We did a maintenance bump of the chart.js library. So this adds chart components. This adds charting capability that you can just drag and drop on your forms and do data binding. It's a really nice, useful library that a lot of people use. We added a few enhancements and a couple fixes. Programmatically, you can clear a chart. Similar to the last update I just spoke about, we add the JS event parameter to the click handler on the chart so that it actually passes the event if you want to know where on the screen it was clicked, for example. There's also an event handler for after the chart has completely rendered, because these things can kind of draw asynchronously and you might want to run something when it's loaded and fully rendered. So that's a nice addition for those of you that are using that. That's in the Servo package manager as well. NG grids, which is a really extensive component library. It actually consists of 2 grids, the data grid and the power grid. We've done several webinars about these. This is a very complex set of components. We did a maintenance bump on both the grid components, but also there's a service package there for sort of calling API like global settings. Both of those were bumped up. A lot of work went into that. There was, I think, 19 cases that were resolved for different fixes. One API addition to get the column index So you get the index of a column by ID. This is useful when you're like reading back in the column state or something, and you actually want to know the index of one of the columns that you're reading by ID. Just a kind of a minor API addition. And we also updated the wiki docs to reflect the changes to the API. That's in the Servo package manager as well. These are some pretty minor, maintenance bumps. Bootstrap Extra Components provides a sort of extended set of business components like the nav bar and the progress bar I was talking about, etc. So there were some fixes there. The advanced renders package, this is really kind of for advanced use cases. It's mainly used by the Popup Filter component, which we announced at the beginning of the year. It's one of our new components that a lot of people are using. It depends on this one. So this one's kind of a dependency. You could have a use case to use this by itself, but it is in our public repository, and there were actually quite a bit of enhancements to that. So I wanted to include this in the announcement for those of you that might want to use this standalone, but it's kind of an advanced use case. So, but just good to know that that's being maintained quite actively. The pop-up filter I just mentioned, this is one of our newer components. It's very popular. We did a webinar all about it in the last quarterly release. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, please go back to our archives and watch that one, because I'm getting a lot of positive feedback about this component. People really like it, and we are actively maintaining it. We added a couple of enhancements. We added like for filtering. So by default, I think the filtering was a starts with, an exact match. So now we have the option for like filtering, but we made it not the default. So there's a config option to say that you want the default to be like and not an exact match. So you can check that out. It's a kind of a minor fix, or a minor enhancement. The Lookup API, this is, we did a webinar about this a bit farther back. This is a nice API to do a sort of an advanced sort of pop-up search thing. It's like a value list on steroids. If you haven't seen it before, please check out the archives. There were a couple cases resolved here in terms of value list bindings to the columns in the lookup. So it pops up a grid with a type ahead search, and you can see a lot more data than you would with a value list. That's what it does. There's a few cases there resolved. We have a really popular search API for text-based searches that's been out for a very long time. This one got a couple of enhancements, or one enhancement and a couple of fixes. There is a method in there to get the results of the search as a data set, and there's a parameter in there that's optional. And if you didn't specify, it's the max number of rows. If you didn't specify it, it would default to 0, which I guess didn't make a lot of sense. So now, if you don't specify it, it defaults to unlimited rows. So svyutils, which is a very low-level kind of generic utility API library that's used in a lot of projects. It's a dependency for a lot of the other modules that we ship. It received a maintenance bump. There was one method deprecated, get client ID, because now we have the client manager plugin for, I think, since Servo 8.2. So it's kind of duplicate. So we just deprecated it, but it still works. So if you reference it, don't worry about it. And there was one small fix in there. Part of that package is the Excel utils. You might remember sort of at the top of the slide deck, I mentioned the Jasper Reports plugin being updated. When you get the SPI Excel utils package, it does have some external binaries that are required. There's really extensive, nice wiki docs that my colleague had put up there a long time ago and has maintained about how to get that external binary. You do get it from the Jasper Reports plugin, so that we don't have conflicting versions of the same binary if you happen to use both of those at the same time. So we standardize on one. But we did add quite some enhancements there, including API updates having to do with actual Excel stuff like cells and sheets and things. Also convenience for method chaining in those APIs, so that's quite nice. If you are building mobile applications that you want to deliver a native interface, so for iOS and Android, then you're probably aware of the SPI PhoneGap. This is a module to bridge to like Cordova plugins to be able to do things native like GPS or camera, etc. on phones. This is very actively maintained because we have a bunch of customers that are doing cool stuff on mobile devices. And in fact, I was checking since we did the last quarterly release, making sure all these packages get released at the same time. But this one had, I think, 6 releases since the last webinar. So I total those up. I think there's 6 enhancements, 2 fixes. So if you are building mobile applications, please check out all the release notes for all of the releases you may have missed, because there's been a lot of work there. Another extension project is the NG desktop. So this is if you're building with the NG client, you want to build applications that run natively on a desktop and have support for things like hardware integration or connection to the file system. We call that the NG desktop project. We've done a couple of webinars on that. So if this interests you and you haven't heard about it, check out the archives. A very minor bump to add support for, we had file watching already, but now you can watch folders. So you can also select folders. So just some API changes there. Check those out if you're building native desktop that needs to talk to the file system. Okay, I think that covers, I know it's a lot of content, and I know it's not a lot of demo, but the cool demos are coming later this week. But I think that covers kind of the release as a whole. So Rutger, can you help me if we have any questions coming in? I'm going to leave up, these are useful links, basically the release notes for this release. If you want to see all the cases that are connected to this, so individual cases, you can see those as well. And for any of the packages that I mentioned, those are all available in the Servo Package Manager. And I'll just show you really quickly. If you go to the Servo Packages node in the IDE and you right click and select download and install with Package Manager, here's where you get a list of all of the components, all of the sort of services, which are browser API type things, layout managers, and modules. So each one of these has, let me make some room here. Each one of these can link out to documentation, wiki documentation, and release notes and everything there. So if you're just getting started, that's where you can access all of the extension packages.
Cool. Let me see if we've got some questions. I think everybody's waiting for your demo, Sean, because I've got only one question. That's regarding the cloud login. If the cloud login is required.
The cloud login is not required because obviously if you're working offline or on an airplane or something, you don't want to be blocked from having access to do your work. So it's not the intention that we want to force you to log in. This has to do with identifying your account when we begin to connect more and more the IDE to some of our cloud services. And so today, that is the automated build pipeline and end-to-end testing, which we're using more and more with every new project, and as well as production hosting. But also, we're going to start to add more and more services like analytics to see how your applications are being used, and also some of the builder services. So the last 2 extensions that I mentioned were the NG Desktop and the NG Mobile. Both of those projects require to build binaries because while Servo provides a way to build HTML5, pure HTML5 applications that you just deploy as a, to a web server, if you are going to distribute binaries for native desktop applications or native mobile applications, you have to build them. And so we plan to offer cloud building as a service, and that can just connect directly to your account. So you can export kind of from the IDE through our cloud to generate the binaries and distribute them to your customers. So more and more, I think that we'll be relying on that, and we want to get that in place. It's also the tutorials for it's a lot for the first use experience. We know that Servo is difficult to get started in, and we want to be able to connect user with content to watch and help get started. And it's helpful to know who they are, so we can give them kind of, if we give them a 5-part tutorial, and we know they watched the first 3 videos or something, then we can keep suggesting the tutorial videos. So it's aimed a lot at those users as well. you can dismiss the tutorials if you don't want to see them and leave that as an option.
Okay, thank you, Sean. I got one more question about the package manager. It shows updates for the server solutions, but the update icon is missing. So the question is, how do I update the solutions such as svyutils?
Oh, okay. So you have an existing version, but the update icon is missing. Let me see. I think there is a fix for that. I'll have to take that offline.
Okay.
Because if you actually have it, and see this is the install, but if you're not on the latest, it should have an update icon there, I think is what he means. And then if you click that, it'll update you to the latest if you have a version installed, but it's not the latest. So yeah, please file a case for that. I thought I might have seen a case come by related to that, but I'm not sure. But it could be an issue, so we want to make sure that gets resolved in the final. So thanks for pointing that out.
All right. No other questions I see so far.
Okay, well, thanks everyone, and we'll be back Wednesday with this time a demo, more demo and less slides having to do with JSON Web Tokens and securing your applications.